ahead and start. I did turn the speakers on and started recording.
Tape on this side.
Okay, we are back in session. Judge Benjamin.
We're back on the record after a break. All of the board members are back. During the break, the board members were provided with copies of applicant's brief, which I've marked as Exhibit A, and with the brief of the Attorney General's office, which I've marked as Exhibit 1, and those will be added to the record before the panel. The board has read the briefs. We're back in session. Mr. Wittenberg, I'm going to let you go first again. I've also read the brief, and I do note that you covered many of the same arguments in your opening statement. So you can begin again with the observation that the board has now seen your arguments twice. But if there's anything that you would like to emphasize, you are welcome to do that before I turn to Mr. Tomplay.
I appreciate that, Your Honor, and I'll do the best I can. I am concerned about the fairness of this proceeding, though, I must say on the record. The briefs were due more than 3 weeks ago, and the purpose of that is to give the board the opportunity to read them and digest them and consider them in conjunction with the record. In this particular case, the applicant had 2 experts testify at the hearing, a neuropsychologist, Dr. Swain, and a rheumatologist, Dr. Ben-Artsy. Their opinions and their testimony are ignored in the proposed decision. All the more reason why it was essential and very important in order for Dr. Nassi to have a fair hearing here today, for those briefs to have been considered in a diligent fashion. Now, I appreciate that the board has extended the time and taken the time to read the briefs, but I do believe that there is some prejudice here as a consequence of those briefs not having been considered for a period of time before this hearing. I noted that the briefs came in at about 10:20, which gave the board members, nearly 15 minutes to read the both briefs. So, and I feel like my presentation now is somewhat disjointed for that reason. In any case, Dr. Nassi applied for her license back in December of 2011. She's diligently been pursuing her license since then, along with working on her health issues. During her residency program, she had difficulties because of depression and because of fatigue. And we now know that the cause of that depression and that fatigue was undiagnosed and untreated lupus. Period. End of story. Dr. Shipko, the board's expert, testified at the hearing, and he wrote in his opinion, in his brief, psychiatrist, his expertise is in psychiatry. There is no mental disorder. There is no psychiatric diagnosis. He defers to a rheumatologist to determine what the basis might be in terms of lupus, the prognosis, the diagnosis of lupus, the prognosis, and the treatment for it. There's no question, this record is absolutely crystal clear that everyone agrees that Dr. Nassi does not suffer from any mental illness, or her previous psychiatrist revised his diagnosis from major depressive disorder to depression now in remission as a consequence of the lupus. So Section 822 of the Business and Professions Code is very clear, and that's the only basis for the proposed restriction on restricted license is Section 822, that Dr. Nassi currently suffers from a mental or physical condition that impairs her ability to practice safely. And on this record, there is no current diagnosis or condition. That's clear. And my brief goes into pretty extensive detail on the testimony of Dr. Swain and Dr. Benartzi, the only rheumatologist to testify at this hearing, on those points. And the reason I went into such detail in my 15-page brief is because the administrative law judge failed to inform the board members of their testimony, which was absolutely crucial. I want to re-emphasize something that is compelling, and that is that although Dr. Nassi suffered with lupus that went undiagnosed and untreated through her residency program, the record is clear that she received satisfactory and above satisfactory reviews throughout. She had 4 reviews from attending physicians that were low satisfactory, never any unsatisfactory. And those were all on rotations in which overnight call was involved, where she was sleep deprived. All along while she was suffering from the effects of lupus that went undiagnosed and untreated. It has now been diagnosed, it is now being treated. Dr. Benartzi, who is the only rheumatologist to testify, has opined, has testified that the nature of the lupus is minor, that as of January of this year, the lab values showed no lupus activity, and that the only symptom that Dr. Nassi is currently experiencing is mild fatigue. It's kind of mild fatigue that a doctor might experience if he or she had a bad night's sleep or was suffering from a cold. That is the uncontroverted testimony of the only rheumatologist to testify. Dr. Shipko is not a rheumatologist. He is a psychiatrist. He has testified that there is no psychiatric diagnosis, and so that record is clear. Now, the most compelling evidence, or one of the pieces of compelling evidence, is that even though Dr. Nassi was suffering with undiagnosed and untreated lupus during her residency program, and she had difficulties with fatigue and depression because of it, her program residency director, Dr. Lagomasino, submitted to the board confirmation that Dr. Nassi was to be provided with 27.5 months of credit for postgraduate medical training. So she got credit for all of the time that she was in the residency program. That's Exhibit D. That's an email from Dr. Lagomasino to the board. Exhibit C, I may be transposing C and D, but I believe it's Exhibit C, is the medical board form that the program director is required to submit to the board as part of the application process under penalty of perjury, indicating, and I quote, "The trainee has acquired the skill and qualifications necessary to safely assume the unrestricted practice of medicine in this state. Now, the board requires the program director to submit that form, not just any person, but the program director of the residency program, because the program director is the person best suited to assess and determine whether the trainee is qualified and is safe to practice with an unrestricted license. And in this particular case, this is in the record, Dr. Lagomasino was intimately familiar with Dr. Nassie's situation because she was the one who was involved and had the meetings with Dr. Nassie to discuss the issues concerning her fatigue and depression. She was the one who discussed Dr. Nassie's performance with the other residents, with the staff, and with the attendings. And again, she's certified under penalty of perjury that Dr. Nassie is safe to assume the unrestricted practice of medicine. I also want to just come back full circle and say something about Dr. Nassie. It's also part of the record. She is quite an accomplished woman. She graduated from Stanford University with a degree in chemical engineering, went and worked as an engineer for Amgen, then went to the joint MD PhD program at Albert Einstein, received her master's degree in neuroscience with honors, then went on and received her PhD in neuroscience. She's published 3 peer-reviewed articles in medical journals, and after she left the residency program, she continued to and completed research with the psychiatrist in the psychiatry department. And she also took a trip to Haiti and volunteered doing chart reviews and volunteering at a HIV/AIDS clinic in Haiti. And this is all pre-lupus diagnosis. So if we consider all of that history and we consider what Dr. Lagomasino has certified under penalty of perjury, and we consider what Dr. Benartzi, the only rheumatologist to testify, has said, that the lupus was responsible for her problems, and now the lupus is under control, then on this record, Dr. Nassie must be issued an unrestricted license. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tomplay.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman and board members. Again, I just have very little to add to the written argument that the board has received. First, I do want to correct an inaccuracy in the brief that I've submitted on behalf of the complainant. The opposing counsel was correct to point out that I did make an error, and I just want to correct this right away, please. On page 4 of complainant's written argument, on lines 4 through 6, I referenced applicant's discussion of depression concerning her withdrawal from medical school. That's actually inaccurate. I made an error. She was discussing her dismissal from residency. So the medical school reference there is inaccurate. I apologize for that. And that brings us then to the focus of this brief and the focus of the hearing, which was the applicant's performance during her residency is being the real issue here and really the most direct evidence of her ability to practice medicine safely. So I just want to read a quick quote because I have little to add to the factual findings made by the ALJ in the proposed decision and little to add to the arguments and the penalty that I've recommended in this written argument. So I just want to quote briefly a sentence that the ALJ made as part of her factual finding. And she wrote, referring to the psychiatrist that the board hired to evaluate this applicant, who also testified at hearing, Dr. Shipko. The ALJ wrote, Dr. Shipko credibly and persuasively opined that if applicant were to practice medicine with a significant degree of impairment she demonstrated prior to leaving residency it could pose a danger to patients in her care. So that was a key factual finding by this ALJ that supported her decision to impose a term of probation on the applicant. And I'm just going to read a summary that I've written of my argument that I think explains this briefly. The only safe way to license someone who has been terminated from a residency program due to performance deficiencies constituting unsafe practice, and these are deficiencies relating to the practitioner's personality, her behavior, and the quality of her care, is with a probationary license, and one that ensures close monitoring and necessary treatment of any mental and physical issues underlying her poor performance. That's the summary of the factual findings. That leaves us with penalty. That's what the board has asked the parties to address today, the appropriate penalty. I've laid forth my recommendation in the written argument for 3 years of probation and the terms and conditions that we would recommend here at the Health Quality Enforcement section. And I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have. Thank you.
Questions of Mr. Tomplay? Mr. Wittenberg, we're coming back to you for your 5 minutes of reply.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just want to emphasize that the statement of issues and the proposed decision relate to evidence section 822. The only issue is whether Dr. Nassib currently is suffering from a mental illness or physical illness that impairs her ability to practice safely and competently. There is no allegation concerning quality of care. Her competency, her knowledge, her ability to practice is not questioned and is not part of these proceedings. It would be a travesty of justice for there to be some consideration or some determination, because that's just not the case. It's not alleged, it's not part of the record, quality of care. It's just simply, is Dr. Nassib suffering from a mental or physical illness? And that goes back, takes me back to the very important statement that Mr. Tomplay read concerning Dr. Shipko that he relies on, and that is, if the applicant were to practice medicine with a significant degree of impairment she demonstrated at residency.
A little slower when you read, please.
Sure, I'm sorry. Dr. Shipko's statement that counsel is relying on and that the ALJ relied on exclusively as the basis to establish that there's a current impairment is, quote, if applicant were to practice medicine with a significant degree of impairment she demonstrated prior to leaving her residency, then she might pose a danger. Well, that statement alone proves our case, that Dr. Shipko's only position is that if what happened 5 years ago in residency were to happen in the future, then there's a potential danger. What he doesn't take into account and what he does not testify to is that there is a current problem. And what this record is just chock full of is evidence that there is no current problem, that those difficulties that Dr. Shipko refers to that occurred back in residency were a consequence of undiagnosed and untreated lupus. And so, again, and Dr. Shipko is a psychiatrist not qualified to render an opinion concerning rheumatology. Dr. Ben-Artzi, the only rheumatologist to testify, is, and he has opined, in fact, that Dr. Nassib does not present any problem. Her condition of lupus is well under control, and it's does not present a danger or a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Wittenberg at this time? Mr. Tom Plate, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I have nothing further to add. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Any questions of Mr. Tom Plate? Yes, sir. Yes, so I was going to come back to Mr. Wittenberg because I thought the arrangement was that if Dr. Nessie wanted to speak, she would do so after the lawyers. I will do that. But first, I'm not sure. Were there any questions for Mr. Tom Plate? No. Mr. Wittenberg, would you like your client to speak to the board?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, then, Ms. Nessie, would you rise and I'll swear you in, please? Solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Stand, please. Go
Good
ahead.
morning. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before the board and talk to you a little bit about my journey towards becoming a physician. It's been a while, and it's been a process that I would have to say started with my own personal experiences with medicine. I think it's part of the record. When I was young and I developed an autoimmune disorder and started seeing doctors, and I was very impressed with the ones who seemed to really care and take the time to get to know me and my concerns. And looking back, I would say that's probably around the time that I made the commitment to try to become that kind of person in someone else's life. And since then, I've pursued science and medicine with all of my energy and all of my dedication, in and out of school. So when I pursued science in graduate school, that was always part of the picture. And ever since I've left residency, it's continued to be part of the picture. It's my passion, it's my obsession. I read all the time and try to remain part of the community that advances the frontiers of science and medicine. I think really the thing that's missing is the opportunity on my part to actively care for a patient and to sort of pay it forward. But I'm still committed to that. I'm still dedicated to that. I think a lot of people would say that the time and effort that it's taken since I applied for my license to have the license to do that, to have permission to care for someone in that capacity, has been pretty energetically involved. Some might describe it as exhausting, but I really wouldn't consider any other option. I don't see myself in any other capacity than someone who does care for a patient in whatever capacity I'm allowed to do. And if I'm given the opportunity, that is what I would like to do. There is also a part of my record, the struggles that I had in residency. And I think probably on paper, it doesn't reflect how really difficult some of those moments were for me. Lack of sleep affected me greatly in ways that I wasn't probably able to articulate at the time because I didn't really know. In retrospect, it's easy to see. And I didn't have the power to protect myself from lack of sleep the way I do now. Apropos of that, I feel like I should say I'm operating in a sleep-deprived state right now. I wasn't able to sleep much last night. I was a little nervous about the meeting today. So the difference is great. The difference is vast. Having a correct diagnosis, having a team of doctors who are on you and are helping and taking some of the right medications makes a real difference. And I now, and I know it from both ends, as a physician and as a patient. I think that makes me a better care provider. I think that makes me a more careful care provider. From the beginning, I've tended to think of myself as a fairly conscientious person, and I continue to do so. I always had my patient's best interest. It's very core to the way I see myself, and I really would like the opportunity to be able to practice and to provide care in the way that I've experienced it in my own life. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions of the applicant from the board?
Dr. Nasi, if you get a license, what type of practice are you planning to do?
Well, I would like to practice in some kind of a group setting with colleagues who are available and are there to support me and to have discussions with. So, honestly, I don't know anyone who starts off going at it alone. I'd like to be in a community of care providers like myself, and appreciate the support of collegiality and coverage.
My question, what type was actually like primary care? Because you did not finish your residency in
correct.
psychiatry, so that's what I'm asking.
My interest and my training have focused on mental health care and mental health issues, and so I would see patients who have mental health concerns or complaints primarily. I don't see myself as a primary care provider in terms of a generalized level of care. But the vast majority of my training has been in psychiatry, and that's where I feel comfortable.
The last one is that are you have any interest in finishing up your residency before you go into practice?
I would love to finish residency, and if I see the opportunity to be accepted into a residency program, I would definitely take it. I think it will be a matter of finding the correct opportunity that will allow me to go back to residency. I do know that I'm required to have a license at this point in my training, so it's kind of chicken or egg, but yes, finishing residency and becoming board certified psychiatrist are definitely high priorities for me.
Any other questions? Thank you. Council, unless there's anything else that concludes the hearing, it will be submitted to the board. Is there anything else, Mr. Wittenberg?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Mr. Tomplay?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you both. Thank you all. Off the record. The board's going to go into closed session now, I believe.
Your Honor, I actually will do the next case
Okay.
session. I'm going to take the position.
All right.
Have to close it.